I talk really fast and wave my hands in the air. No, no, you're right. It is a challenge, and believe it or not, I'm going to start with the deeper you get into it, as you start to stand up some really solid metrics around your learning, one of the risks is that you can start to compete with the business unit. As an example, you've got a new initiative, and you start to get into issues. Okay, was it the learning around the initiative or the initiative? Because they've got to win too. In terms of the business initiative. So I'm gonna take that thought and put it aside for another discussion. And I'll try and be very brief with this. Mark Allen, who wrote the Corporate University Handbook, I was having a discussion with him one day, and he said something, because I was having this type of discussion, and he said something that I've always kind of taken with me. And he said, Jim, he goes, because I was trying to get him to say that my learning program was good. Mark, you're an expert. Would you please tell me, bless this program, this binder and the online piece, because it's good? And he said, I can't tell you if it's good until you show me if it solves the problem it was made for. But the key point is, he said, at the end of the day, the organization has problems, and it deploys resources from multiple business units and money, and applies it at that problem. And at the end of the day, the organization either solves the problem and wins, or it doesn't. And you're either a part of that solution or you're not. And so at the end of the day, some stuff you can't measure. It's just being a part of the package of the solution. So that's kind of that's this overarching thing that I've always thought was valid, and it carried with me. But there is a more tangible, what can you do? I think it starts actually in the design phase. In that, and we've actually done this with a couple of business units. It's very rare, and you got to be diplomatic when you do this. But literally, if you can't tell me what the business problem is, and you can't show me the number that you want to change, and we can't identify what the behaviors are that drive that number, I can't build you a learning solution that will win, because you don't know what winning looks like. And so from my perspective, one of the key things is getting clarity up front about what is the problem, what is the number that indicates it's solved, and then even with soft skills, you can get there in terms of getting clarity with the business unit owners on exactly what those behaviors look like. And then with some of these technology pieces and other pieces, how is it that we can put an assessment framework around there to see if we're getting those behaviors and results? But I would argue that I think a significant portion of the time, it's that we miss the first step about getting clarity on what is the number and what is the behavior. And the better we get at that, the easier it is on the back end to assess whether or not we're getting both.
Just to build on that really quickly.
Please.
One of the things that I've done, just because of this competition with the business unit for interventions that they've got going as well, is when we get to that number of, what's the behavior going to look like that's different, then I ask the question, and what % do you think we could claim in learning as a result of bringing this in? Because you're doing other things as well. So whatever number that is, if it's 50%, 20%, it doesn't have to be exact, doesn't have to be precise. It just has to be, yeah, we think we'll actually make a difference, so that you've got that in writing. If you've got a,
everybody's got to win.
Yeah, so everybody's got to win, but you've got this. If we win, then we get to claim 20% of the credit as part of and you make that up front before anybody else gets to claim it after the fact when it's successful.
Good advice.
Yeah.
What I heard is that there are a lot of subtleties and complexities. There are some black and white answers. I think your examples that we heard around sales, if you can move big sales metrics with a learning intervention, obviously those are more black and white. And as we get into the more subtle areas, what I think we heard from the panelists are, make sure you make the agreement, strike the bargain up front with the business leader, agree on the definition of the business challenge, make sure that your intervention is not just educational or learning based, but there's also some experiential component, some embedding with work or on the job to make that change stick. But obviously that piece up front is important, and then measuring that outcome at the back end so that you can at least take credit for it. There's a critical need in learning when you're managing a large learning function. The budget expense tends to be a pretty large line item, and you've got to have a position to advocate for the value that you contribute to the business. I think these are some really good examples of how people are doing that in a large, complex environment. Chana, you have a comment?
The social learning tends to be social, and especially in a corporate environment, the so-called side effects, if I may use the word. Is there obviously leadership has a role to play. There are processes that need to be put in place. I'd like to hear your experience. I mean, if this is something that you've tried at Sun or any other organization.
Yeah. So first off, I'd like to debunk there's no such thing as being able to ban social networking in a workplace. 71% of millennials say that have bans in their workplace, say they get around it because you've got to confiscate their phone if you don't want them to participate. And for them, they have grown up in a collaborative learning environment their whole career. If any of you went through an MBA 20 years ago, it is not the same as going through an MBA now. You work in teams. You work together, you learn together. And so for millennials, they consider it taking away the tools that they need to be successful because they are relying on other people to ask questions and to collaborate. So if we're worried about them spending too much time with their friends, then I think what we have to do is look at providing them the tools in the workplace that will connect them to others so that they can work collaboratively. But if we're going to try and take away all the collaboration tools, I don't think we're going to be competitive employers. And so I think you've got to have a really rich set of social media guidelines to give people. And companies like Intel have over 30 modules in developing your digital IQ so that you're a good member of using social media and so on. But I think taking it away or is just means we won't attract the right people.
I've got a little thing on to so I don't get thrown out. One of the things that I do think will be helpful, because it has a role and it can achieve some successes. We've had on project teams very focused on a problem. Collaboration works well, and I'm sure it has broader implications. But the piece that I think we're going to have to get to is that right now a lot of the social platforms are external to the business platforms and the processing platforms. And one of the things that I think is going to be helpful to get this, and I can visualize this, and this is another place where we got to get with the CIO, is we've got to move the wall out of the middle and put the collaboration piece into the business pieces so that they can do it in real time, in the moment that they're having the issues.
We're tracking in our research at Corporate University Exchange about 100 products right now that are social collaboration suite products.
Correct.
That are used behind the firewall, that are sort of Facebook kind of tools that people are using right now. So there's huge explosion of products and companies. We assume there'll be a shakeout because there's obviously a lot of experiments going on, but anyway, it's a really interesting, ripe, white-hot area within the IT and learning and collaboration world.
The number one destination site at IBM of all of their internal websites is one that helps them find an expert, which is very much a Facebook-like application.
Like mentoring they use it for mentoring.
Yeah. And then they have, and there's internal Twitter-like applications so that you can tweet within your own work environment. It doesn't go outside the environment. There are all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, we just did a case study on Boeing. They're getting 1.5 million hits per day in a Facebook-like application that they built that allows you to find an expert, ask and answer questions.
Right.
Very similar to what Rich described, but Boeing's using it in a much broader context across the businesses. But anyway, very interesting case study.
Getting the external social network into an internal IT organization, like what Boeing has done, it is bound to have two poles. Learning organization is on one end, and you have the IT organization on the other end. That's an interesting journey, and it maybe not in this forum, but it would be very interesting to see the case studies of their experience. I'm not sure if you have seen anything, Carrie.
Well, I'm just going to encourage you to read the book. Because we have several examples in there. I think Cerner is a really great example of how they've implemented a Facebook-like application and really seen some business results and plan to expand to all the way through to consumers. So they hope to build a network following over 1 million people over time, helping improve decisions about health. So we have probably 20 or 30 examples in the book of companies that have some really successful business results with a variety of social tools, anywhere from gaming to networking.
How do you align your budget or your resources? How do you align to the business strategy? And I think Jim gave some example about talking to the CEO. So maybe a 1-minute answer how you align it, and then Rich, if you have a thought on, I'd be curious to, after we hear about that, if you could describe as the CIO for the Americas, how do you align your resources to the business strategy? Not the talent management component, but IT investments. How do you decide where to place your bets? So maybe we can just hear from you guys first.
I'm going to defer to a lot of some of the earlier comments about just getting clarity, whether it's whatever business unit is, what's the business problem, the results, and the behaviors. The only kind of addendum I'd put on that is that there's usually a ton of initiatives and things that come over the bow that are generated from other business units. One of the things that we attempt to do is always have 1 or 2 initiatives that are ours, that have a finite problem that the organization is facing, and that we publicize in advance. Here's the business problem. Here's the number we're trying to hit, and we're going to build. It's not an auto product. It's not a business unit based thing. It's our initiative designed to change that number, and so we always have at least a couple, 2 or 3 of those each year that we can hang our hat on, that we did in addition to the work that we do with all the business units.
Beautiful. Thanks. Carrie.
You know, I think the most important thing is to build a reputation for excellence and then build a relationship with the senior team. So what I did at Sun was we would agree on kind of percentage breakdowns and how much of that would kind of be controlled by the CEO and his staff in terms of setting priorities. And then we would find the next level of sponsoring committees to say, for sales, for example, there was a committee that overlooked all of the budget and resources were there, and annually we'd kind of go over, okay, this is what we're going to spend the money on, and if you want to do anything more, then we had to take stuff off the plate. And then we just left a little bit that was for kind of all-purpose, like buying libraries of e-learning and that kind of thing. And when we went through that process, we ended up sunsetting thousands of courses, literally. So we no longer offered. The second most popular course was 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. When I went in, and that went away, because we said what we'll do is if you want to go to that, here's a discount, and you can go to it publicly. But it's not aligned to a business strategy. It's a good course, but it's just not aligned to our business strategy. So we'll give you ways to do it, or you can take it online. Here it is available online. So we, really shifted the kinds of things that we offered. And so by shutting off the pipeline of supply of things that didn't align to business strategy, we became aligned to business strategy.
Great. I think those were 3 great lessons on aligning learning to the business strategy. And the reason that question is important is because there are all too often people take training or learning interventions and it fails the relevance test. It wasn't relevant. It didn't help me do my job. It's not what I need today. And so obviously it's a big challenge. And I'm curious, Rich, just to reflect from a CIO's perspective, one of the things that happens in IT is this idea of relevance. There's used to be a lot of talk of shelfware. You buy all these IT applications or you build it and they never come. It strikes me that you gave some really good examples today of built it and they came. And I'm curious, how do you align the IT organization with the business challenges and the business need? How do you create that and keep that relevance?
Well, what we've done is to tie in our IT planning process with our firm's strategy development process. So we have a very formal structure that we go through every year. Starts on the business side and then it cascades down into IT, and then we marry what the business goals are with what we've set as strategic IT objectives, and we use that as our input to how we drive our learning program. And from the slides that you saw, what we do is we pick a handful of global initiatives that we agree on that really are part of our IT change programs. And we carve out money from our annual budget and we set it aside for that global sponsorship. But then we provide the regions the ability to develop some local regional investment, and we give them the discretion to tailor what they need to change the people in that region based off what's happening at a regional level. So it's a 2-tiered outcome that we end up with.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you very much for that answer, Rich. That was helpful for us as learning leaders to hear about that from the CIO perspective. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the IT side of the house with learning. So with that, how about a thanks for our panelists up here. This was a great panel. Thank you all.